My name is Chip Brantley. I've been at UA in the Department of Journalism and Creative Media. Hey, Neela. My mom's name is Neela. Since 2010, and I teach a variety of courses. I teach a lot of writing courses. I've taught food writing for 5 or 6 years now, and I teach a lot of, for lack of a better word, media production classes as well. My background is in I guess what we used to call print. I started as a writer, writing feature stories, did some straight up hard news reporting, some investigative reporting. I've also worked in film, documentary film, and narrative film, and most recently have been involved in some experimental documentary work and podcasting. I've co-created and co-hosted a podcast called White Lies that was released by NPR last year, or 2019. And wrote a book years ago about a stone fruit breeder. So I've done kind of a lot of different things over the course of my career in journalism and film and radio. And one of the constants that I have seen, and one of the things I've continued to try to work on over the years, is organization, because I am not by nature an organized person. I'm very messy. I will not show you my desk right now, but if I turn to the computer, actually I will. I'll just turn my computer to show you my desk. It's like really, really messy. Just piles of paper everywhere. My mortgage statement, just junk everywhere. My car is messy. I'm just a naturally disorganized, messy person. And so that is, you can get by with being a disorganized, messy person. And I don't know what you guys, if y'all are very organized and neat, or if you're messy, but you can get by doing one-off stuff. Like if you're writing an article about something and you're going to be done with it tomorrow, and then you're going to move on to something else, that you can manage that. But for longer projects, for projects that require, maybe weeks, months, even years of research, like writing a book or making a narrative podcast that takes, we ended up reporting White Lies over the course of 5 years, off and on. For projects like that, you really have to be organized. And if you're not, you will lose so much time and lose so much of your reporting, because you won't be able to find the thing that you did. And more importantly, you won't be able to remember how you learned the thing, which sounds crazy, but at a certain point, you will, if enough time passes and you learn a lot more things, you will forget how you came to learn a thing. And that can really have detrimental effects for a project when, for example, you need to verify for an editor or producer where you found out this information. Some information is easily verifiable, but some is not. And having the kind of story of how you found something out can be really helpful. And so over the years, I've developed a system that really works for me, and it's one I just wanted to share with you. There's a tip sheet, a PDF attachment in the session files there, so you can download that if you would like, and has more details on what I'm going to talk about. But basically, I work in Google Drive. Do y'all use Google Drive at all, or some sort of cloud-based storage for your work files?
Yeah, we use Google Drive at Sparkman.
Okay.
For our news stories.
Okay, good deal. What about Neela, Tess, Kyla? Do y'all use Google Drive at all? Well, I think everybody's familiar with Google Drive, and there are other services, Dropbox, Box, there are tons of these things. But the reason I love Google Drive is I think it's just the most, it's connected to my calendar. It's connected, of course, to, okay, good deal, you're at Sparkman too. That it's connected to my Gmail. Just everything I do, sort of, for better or for worse, involves some sort of Google platform. And so so for every project I start, so right now I'm working on a project, I mentioned this in the tip sheet, about Cuba. It involves some Cuban refugees. And ooh, you're figuring out lunch. Yeah, that's important. I need to eat lunch soon as well. Let me know what you decide. So I am working on a project about Cuba, and I started working on this with my partner Andy, who I worked on with White Lies. We started working on this Cuba project back in 2015, and the way we work is that we'll have different projects overlapping going on at once, and we may have to put a project down for a while and then come back to it later. And that's the case with this Cuba project. And so I started this Cuba project in 2015, and when I started the project, I came up with the shorthand, the very clever shorthand Cuba, for a Google Drive folder. And there's just a folder on Google Drive that I have called Cuba. And when I open that folder, it has a couple of other folders, one for research, one for audio that I record, like whether it's an interview or just tape out, sort of man on the street tape or whatever. All the audio goes there. And then structure. So when we get into the structure of the show, it's going to be this podcast we're working on, this Cuba-oriented podcast, is going to be probably somewhere between 7 and 10 episodes. And so what we'll do is we'll begin to have conversations about how to structure the show and what each episode should be and where it should go. And so we'll put those in the structure episode. And then an admin folder, which is like where all the junk goes for projects. So you may have to, I don't know, you may have to do something, you may have to hire somebody over the course of a project, or you may have for a project, if you're working on it with as a freelancer, for example, you may have paperwork that you need to file with the person that's hired you as a freelancer. So anything kind of related to the business of doing the project goes in that folder. And the great thing about this folder structure is everything's in this one place. And so if you're looking for something related to the project, it's there. So when I mentioned I wrote this book in 2008, 2009. It came out in 2009. And it was about a stone fruit breeder in California who developed this fruit called the pluot. He actually just recently passed away at the age of 94. But I worked on that thing and had paper notes and all this stuff. And I've got this gigantic, the biggest like plastic storage container you can find down in my basement with all of my files related to that project. And that was sort of before I started using Google Drive religiously. But now this Google Drive folder is the digital equivalent of that box. Like every document I find, I scan, I put in there. And so everything lives in the central place, which is fantastic because years from now, so I mentioned that the fruit breeder, Floyd Zagers, his name, just died at the age of 94. So I spent a lot of time with Floyd in the 2006, 7, 8, that time frame. And all the material for the book is down in that storage bin. Well, when Floyd died, I got requests from different people to write something about his passing, sort of not quite an obituary, but something along those lines. And being able to like go in the basement, here's this big box full of stuff is handy. But there's all sorts of other things related to the book that are not in that box that are online. And so I was trying to find something I couldn't find. I spent like half a day trying to find this one thing so that I could verify something for this piece of writing I did about Floyd. Well, now everything lives in a Google Drive folder, everything that I need, because for this Cuba project, for example, even though I'm working on it right now, it's possible that in 10 years, some little bit of information about that Cuba story could become interesting, or somebody could be interested in it. And now I don't have to spend half a day looking for something. I can go directly to this Google Drive folder and find it there. So it sounds kind of obvious to keep everything in one place, but it really, I can't tell you how many times or how much time I had wasted trying to find a file because I have things in different places. And I don't know if you're like that. I showed you my actual desk. If I showed you the desktop of my laptop that I'm on right now, you would probably faint because it's so messy. You can't even see the background of my screen because I just dump all sorts of stuff that is not project related there, and I never clean it up, which is terrible. But I'm trying to get better. Anyway, the Google Drive folder, though, for projects or things that really, really matter, they go there. And this is spilled over into my personal life, I should say. Like, now with anything that's not necessarily a work project, stuff that is going on in my life, I'll still start a Google Drive folder and dump everything there because it's just so handy to have everything in one place. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is to come up with a really common sense naming convention for your stuff that you will that will make sense to future to you, right? So like Emma, for example, if you're working on something about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and you want to, you've read a few things that you want to incorporate into your piece about not rushing to judgment. I mean, not rushing to fill her spot on the Supreme Court. If you started a folder for Ginsburg, and you read these things, and rather than just linking to them, because links eventually could die. We've all had that problem at some point where you've clicked on an old link, right? Everybody had that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So rather than just linking to something, downloading it as a PDF or going to the print mode and then downloading it as a PDF, saving it as a PDF, and then uploading it to that folder as a way of preserving that material that you use so that someday you can find it, and to really come up with some common sense naming approach that will make sense to future year. And not only common sense, but consistent. So like for Cuba, all of the files that I put into the Cuba folder start with the word Cuba, because if I'm searching in Google Drive, right away I can refine the results that I'm looking for by using Cuba. Then I do like underscore, and then I'll be as specific as possible about like what the document is. Even if it's a ridiculously long document name, doesn't really matter, because it's not like I'm having to look at it. I'm just finding it in Drive with a search method. And then I always try to put a date at the end of the name. So the reason that's helpful is if, for example, I mentioned, I think in the tip sheet, I mentioned an affidavit I found recently. And that, for the affidavit, I put this date the affidavit was signed, because that is an indication to me if there will be other affidavits for this project that I look at. And that will signpost that one as like, okay, that's that affidavit from Marquez Medina, and it was signed on this and such and such a date. Now, if you don't have a specific document date, you can make a date. You can make it a date that is like when you uploaded it, or like roughly when you think it is, circa 1984 or whatever. But just having a date on there can be really helpful when you're trying to track stuff down. Finally, and possibly most important for a big project, I think, is to create a spreadsheet with your sources and your what I call characters, because I often think of sources now with audio as characters, but to create a master file for anybody you might talk to, or anybody that might be a character or source, even if they're dead. I know that sounds crazy. This White Lies project that I worked on a few years ago, it basically the core action for the story took place in the mid 1960s, and so a lot of the people who are in the story are characters in the story, or presences in the story are dead, but I still wanted to think of them as characters in the story because they are characters in the story. Even if I can't go knock on their door and do an interview with them, I could find archival audio for them. I could get other people to talk about them. I could find their children. There are other ways you can approach dealing with that. But I just want this file, much like this Cuba folder is the place where all the files go for a project. The character or source spreadsheet is the place where every single person you might talk to goes in there. And then eventually you can begin to sort of thin it out. If, for example, like for our project, there were, I don't know, 24 FBI agents from the mid 1960s who we hoped to talk to, in hopes that one of them like had something to say that would be interesting about the story we're working on. And we've eventually got around to, figuring out that all but 3 of them were dead. And so it didn't feel like we needed to sort of keep them in the spreadsheet because we weren't going to go talk to their children or their widow or whatever. Like it was a stretch that it would be useful anyway. So you can begin to thin it out, but having this character list is so important because, again, if you work on a project for a long time, and even if you don't, even if it's only a week or 2 weeks or a month, having this central location for a project so that in the future, if, for example, one of you, Tess, Neela, Emma, you're working on a project in the future, and you remember that in college, when you're working for the school newspaper, you talk to this one person about this thing, and that person might be good to talk to again about this thing. If you've thought consistent, if you have a system in place for putting those people into a spreadsheet, if you start that now, that spreadsheet over time will get more and more powerful, and you'll really be able to save yourself a lot of trouble trying to find people and track people down. And and remembering what it is about a certain person that is relevant. So in the spreadsheets that I make, you know, I put like, there was a judge I talked to, a retired judge I talked to for the for white lies, and he gave us a ton of names, and each one of those names I put referred by the judge's name. So that way, when I went to eventually talk to those people months later, I could say, "Oh yeah, I got your name from Ken Ballard. He suggested I give you a call." That really helps open doors versus like just a cold call where you're like, "My name's Emma Hedrick and I'm working on this story." If you could say like, "My name's Emma Hedrick and I got your name from Ken Ballard," that person may be more open to talk to you. So anyway, those are my like really. It doesn't sound all that. Maybe all that interesting or all that mind-blowing, but to create a central Google folder for all your stuff for each project, to come up with a consistent naming convention for all the files you dump in there, and to dump all the files in there, and then to come up with this character or source list where you can not only track the people you need to talk to or have talked to, but also sort of have a reference for your future self. So that's the thing I think about a lot now, having been frustrated at my younger self for not being tidier and neater. And I've tried to change. I've tried to like get neater and more organized without having to rely on systems like these, but I've failed again and again and again. And so finally I was like, you know what? I'm not going to change. I just need to change my expectations and trick myself into having this really organized system so that I can find it when I need it. Neela says, I want to be a commentator for sports when I finish college. I was wondering, should I major in communication journalism in college since I want to work in this field? Great question. I think it kind of depends on where you go to college. It's a you know, like we have a sports, Alabama now has a sports, I can't remember if it's a major, if it's called sports, or if it's, there's definitely a concentration in journalism that's like sports media. I think I was telling Emma before y'all jumped on, Neela and Tess and Kyla. I'm not sure if Tess and Kyla is one person or two people, but we were talking about majors, and I think a journalism major can be really beneficial. I do think it's also, I was a philosophy major and a French major, and I love that because it was just a background in humanities I found really helpful as I got out into the world, into the work world. So I don't know. It's a good question. I think it just depends. I think it's definitely worth taking when you get to college, you know, taking journalism classes, communications classes early on, just to see what you think. And you'll get an advisor, of course, and to talk to that advisor as well. What other questions do you guys have?
You were talking about maybe majoring in political science. What kind of schools do you think would be good for that?
You know, I think really any school. I think it's one of those, at least at Alabama. So Alabama's got. I'm thinking of a student in particular who's interested in the intersection of journalism and political science, and he's a new college. And he sort of created his own major basically, which new college allows you to do. But I think, you know, that one thing you can do, because I think it's a little bit like, you know, political science is a little bit like economics, or it's always journalism. Like it's sort of, you can find good programs just about anywhere. I think maybe if there's somebody you really respect, for example, if there's a writer who writes for a major magazine or something that you like, and that person happens to adjunct at George Washington or whatever, you know, that might be a draw. I mean, I know that people think about that often, maybe more so with graduate programs, but I think too with undergrad, it's good to look at who the faculty are, you know, and like look if they look like they're interesting. If it's a bunch of like, you know, I think it's just important to look and see kind of what might draw you. And I encourage you to do that regardless of what you major in or where you go. So like look at the faculty and see if they look like they're up to your standards, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think there are all sorts of great, obviously DC, there are a bunch of programs around DC that are focused on political science. Princeton's got a great government sort of political science program. I think UVA, you know, but yeah, where are y'all? I guess you're not. Are you thinking about that yet? You're almost thinking about it. You're close.
I've been thinking about it. I haven't made like an absolute decision yet, but I've been looking at different colleges for the past like year, and I've been looking. Obviously, Alabama University, that's a given because of living in Alabama.
Right.
But I don't know. I was looking at this one college in Florida. I can't remember the name of it, but it had a really good journalism program. And I've been looking at Princeton too. I'm gonna apply there, see if I can get in.
Yeah, may as well. Yeah, that's great. What else? What other questions y'all have?
You said you were talking about that project. You said the Cuba Project. What exactly was that? Like, you touched a little bit. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So it's actually something I'm working on now. It's going to be season 2 of the show White Lies that we did for NPR, and it involves the Memorial Boat Lift, which was in 1980, and basically in 1980, because of some complicated geopolitical matters between the U.S. and Cuba, Cuba allowed what they thought was going to be 10,000 people to leave Cuba and come to the U.S. by boat, by like small boat crafts, like fishing boats and speedboats, and what ended up happening was that like more than 120,000 Cubans came over the course of several months, which was a huge humanitarian crisis, and the U.S. kind of had to figure out how to process people and where to send people and what to do. And so the story basically involves some people who came over in 1980 during the Memorial Boat Lift and kind of what happened to them. We really think of it as kind of the first chapter of our modern immigration system. So it's really a story about immigration and the U.S. immigration system.
That's interesting.
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's a great story. I'm excited about it. It's noon. I don't know if the session is just going to end. I think it might. But thank you guys for coming. I hope it was useful. I really do encourage you to create a system, because even though it doesn't feel like you'll need it now, I think you'll be glad that you did. And my information's on the UA website if anybody ever wants to follow up on anything or